And the closer they got to being able to be their authentic selves, the more successful they got in their career.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the New Rules of Work, a podcast from the Muse where we explore the changing landscape of work and the dynamic between employers and talent.
Today, I'm really excited to be speaking with Jessie Hempel, the host of Hello Monday, a podcast from LinkedIn that explores the changing nature of work and how that work is changing us. So what does work mean to us? Jessie, you've just launched your second season, September 23rd, and I'm so excited to have you on the show to talk with us a little bit about some of the things you've learned. So maybe we'll start with just, a bit about your career, because you spent 16 years as a tech journalist, most recently at Wired, and you joined LinkedIn, last October? As their senior editor at large. Yep. And in part to launch this new podcast. So Hello Monday, which is a great name, by the way. I love it. I'd love to just start with a little more about you, what you've set out to do with Hello Monday, and maybe that's just a good place to begin.
Sure, Catherine, and thank you so much for having me. You are exploring a topic that I think is so important right now. Where does my story begin? My story begins kind of with Hello Monday, in that I set out in my early 20s on a career path thinking I would do one thing, and 2 decades later, I've done about 17 things, none of which I could have guessed when I was in my 20s.
Completely.
And that is right. And I think that's so many people's paths. And so that was what I wanted to explore. And, the TLDR version of my career is I graduated from college, scratched my head, thought maybe I want to be a teacher. A year later thought, nope, maybe I want to be a writer. A year later thought, nope, maybe I want to work at a nonprofit. A year later finally thought, well, I guess I'll go to graduate school for journalism. And I had a really exciting career, again, too many years to comment on, but a lot of years working as a technology journalist. And that was hugely rewarding. It would not have been possible for me in the same way if I hadn't stumbled through 3 or 4 false starts at the beginning. And then around, the middle of last year, I wanted to try something different. And Hello Monday, my podcast, which is hosted by LinkedIn, was that something different. And here we are.
Amazing. It's so funny. I feel very similarly about my own career. I grew up thinking I was going to go in the foreign service. I worked at a U.S. embassy in Cyprus. I then moved into management consulting. Then I went back to the international route, and I moved to Kigali, Rwanda, and worked on vaccines. And then I landed in tech. And, I think when you're in that sort of zigzag, it feels like, what am I doing with my life? How could I get these choices wrong? But looking back now, I'm so grateful for those experiences.
Yeah, looking back, you realize that was the formative experience that prepared you for your career. But while you're in the middle of it, you just think, well, I'm lost. Everyone else seems to know what they're doing.
Yes, the great myth of everyone else. And actually, that's probably a great segue to the next question I had for you, which is, you've had some incredibly fascinating guests on the first season of your podcast. And, everything from just very high profile people, a very diverse set. I think you had Melinda Gates on your podcast. You had the former retail chief of Apple, Angela Arendt, and you had even late night host Seth Meyers, which I'm very jealous of that because I bet he'd be a real fun one to interview. But, as you think back on all of these fascinating conversations, is there, a kind of single theme that has emerged or an interesting dotted line that you think can be drawn between some of these very different career stories?
So completely there is, Catherine. It is this idea that we have to, and indeed we can, trust ourselves. And I tell you that as a little bit of a surprise to me. It really wasn't until I had worked my way through the entire season and spoken with all of these people who do really different things. There's, Seth Meyers, who's late night TV. And then the next week we had Liz Gilbert, who's like the Eat, Pray, Love, author. It's so different. And then Angela, you mentioned Angela Arendt, who's, had a career as CEO of Burberry and then was at Apple. These people do wildly different things, but one thing came through every single thing that they said, which is the big thing that they all seem to get better at over the course of their career was trusting themselves and being more authentic to who they were. And the closer they got to being able to be their authentic selves, the more successful they got in their career.
I mean, it makes sense. It's so simple, and yet it's so hard to do in practice. I remember one of my early jobs where everything that I did was just wrong. You know, the way that I wrote emails, wrong. The way that I
Yep.
most naturally engage with people and communicated and behaved, like wrong. And I actually remember wondering at one point during, I think it was a weekend, while I was at that job, you know, am I just lazy? Am I clumsy? Why can't I seem to hack it? And once I moved on and realized that I actually could lean into some of my natural tendencies and my personalities and do things the way that I really loved doing them. And really part of it was just being in different cultural context from a workplace perspective, being in a different industry. It really just unlocked tremendous acceleration. So that's really cool to hear that that's been such a strong theme.
That's a really great example. And it makes me think of the conversation I had with Melinda Gates. And Melinda was talking about, you know, early in her career when she was working at Microsoft. And this was really early. This was before she was dating Bill. And she was trying to hack it as a business person. And most of her colleagues were male. And there was this culture where people were very aggressive in their way that they presented themselves and their questions and the way that they talked to each other. And she was trying to be that, and it just wasn't working for her. And finally, she actually had a mentor who was a woman who was a little bit further in her career, who just encouraged her to just be herself and not worry so much whether her style or presentation was exactly like everybody else's, but just really be Melinda Gates. And it was when she started doing that her career started to fall into line. And that resonated so much for me because it felt very much like my own story. I don't know. It sounds like it was familiar for you too.
Absolutely. I think that you know, it's incredible how much fun work can be when you feel like you're firing on all cylinders and you're celebrated for who you are. And the opposite is completely true as well.
Yeah.
So that then leads me to, I want to drill into a couple of the key lessons from some of the episodes that I found the most interesting when I was listening to Hello Monday. And one of them was Seth Meyers, as we mentioned. And, you know, he talked about how he supports the ambitions of the writers on his team, even if it means that they eventually leave. And I thought that was really fascinating. It's something that actually I've talked with Anil Dash, who is also on this podcast, who will help employees with their resume if they're, you know, thinking about moving on. I think it's such a fascinating and frankly, a pretty revolutionary idea in a lot of workplaces. What are some of the ways that you think talent leaders and managers might think about this concept of supporting their team even through potentially their departure? And, you know, how could organizations and leaders that are listening potentially institutionalize this?
It's really a progressive approach to talent, I think. And I also think that it is the way that the future works. You know, I know at LinkedIn, we always say that we're, you know, this is the current play and we will eventually move on to our next play. And part of what's going on at our place of work is that we're trying to be really, you know, we're trying to crush it at our current play. But part of what should be happening is that our managers should be helping us to prepare ourselves for our next play, whatever that is and wherever that is. And, you know, Katherine, I think it was in my discussion with Adam Grant, which was another favorite for me, where we were talking about what the future of work looks like the real future, not a year, not 5 years, but far out. And we were talking about how the thing that will help us the most in that future is being generous to other people and supporting other people in what they want to do most. Because today, if say you need engineering help on a project, Katherine, you're going to go to somebody inside your company for that engineering help. But the boundaries between institutions are breaking down and will continue to break down. And it's very likely in the future, you'll just be able to look out over the entire world, like we're all connected digitally, and just find the very best engineering skills to help you with your project. And so our relation to talent is going to be really turned on its head. And we are going to be able to get the most help from others if we support other people in the best way to achieve what they want to achieve. And Adam certainly talked about that in the on the 20-year horizon, right? What Seth is talking about, Seth Meyers, is like how you do that right now in your writing room. And whether that is your writing room, whether that is the boardroom in your technology company, whether you're an educator and that is teachers in your school, he's saying, figure out what motivates the people who work for you and help them do that thing, whether it's for you or not for you, and they will be loyal to you.
I love that. I think it's so powerful. And like you said, I mean, what a way to build relationships for life than knowing that someone has your back, not just because you're working for them or with them, but over the long haul. So I love that.
Is that something that you've seen in your own career? I mean, you're a leader, and I'm sure you've learned a ton in that role.
Absolutely. I've seen it in so many different ways. You know, I think that I've always been a big believer that how you treat people on the way out says so much about you as a manager and as a leader. And, you know, we've been lucky enough to have employees leave the Muse and then come back because maybe what they left for wasn't what they thought, or they just realized that there was more growth to be had here. There were relationships that they valued. And I think if you don't make people feel like you value and support and will help them, regardless of whether they stay or they go, you don't necessarily get that second at bat with people. And I mean, I could think of so many more examples, but I agree with you completely that, you know, reputation, both of individuals and of organizations, is following people for longer. And I do think we're moving towards a world in which talent has more flexibility, where people, as you said, are looking for the best engineer, just not necessarily the best person down the hall. And, you know, that's can be a scary concept to some people, but I'm also really excited because I also think that, you know, the best engineer for a specific project may not be the best engineer for a different project. And also this increased flexibility should allow people to find better and better fits. So switching to another topic, there was another episode, I think it was your one with Elizabeth Gilbert, who wrote Eat, Pray, Love and a number of other books. And you said something really interesting. You were talking about the difference between a job and a career. And, you know, you said you don't have to love your job, but can you explain sort of to people who are listening who may not have thought about it this way before or listened to Hello Monday, can you kind of explain this idea to our listeners?
Yeah, Liz had this really radical idea. And she basically said, look, there are 4 things to concern yourself with here. There is your hobby. That's something you're never going to get paid for. Maybe you knit. There is your job. That is a thing that you get paid for. There is your career. That is ostensibly a thing that you get paid for and that you also get fulfillment from. And there is your vocation. And that is just a thing that you feel called to do. And she basically said, look, people need a job. You got to pay for your lifestyle, whatever that is. And if you're lucky in life, you will have a vocation. You will have something that you really love to do. I mean, for me, it continues to be writing. But this career thing, maybe you don't need it at all. Maybe we've been sold a false bill of goods when we have been told, as many of us were told, I certainly was, like, okay, now in your adulthood, your job is to find a thing that you love and do the thing that you love. And I think particularly for people, for millennials, you know, people in their late 20s and early 30s, they were really pushed, like this idea, you know, you should find fulfillment out of your job. It should be more than a job. It needs to be a career. And, you know, I hope that we feel good about what we do every day, but it's worth asking the question, do we have to love it?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting debate. And I feel personally like I sit on both sides of it to some extent. I mean, on one hand, you know, the entire purpose of the Muse as a business, as a consumer platform, is helping people find work that they enjoy, that they love, helping them find teams and work environments that are a better fit. And of course, you know, I love the idea of people getting satisfaction from what they do professionally, since we all spend so many hours at work every week. But on the flip side, I also really am a believer that that putting so much pressure on people, especially early in their career, or if they have a passion or a vocation that they engage with outside of work, I think putting too much pressure on work to also be your end all be all can be very problematic. And, I was mentioning before that early work experience where I felt like everything about myself was wrong. I was probably even more sort of tortured mentally because I literally was just kicking myself every day. You don't love what you do. Why are you in this job where, you don't love it? And you know what? I learned more in that 2-year job than I probably could have anywhere else at those 2 years in my life. Even though it was not necessarily always very pleasant, I learned so much. And I wish I could just go back to younger Katherine and be like, chill out. You are fine.
Right?
You're learning a lot. You're super early in your career. You will do things later that you love. You do not have to love it now. This is a job. It's a learning experience. Like, calm the F down, basically.
I feel like the theme of this conversation could be like, let's go back to younger Katherine and younger Jesse and tell them to chill out. It's going to be okay.
Yes.
And like, that's actually, it's such a good message for any young people working their way through their, early stages of their career right now. And the other thing, Katherine, is like this idea of what work is in our life. It's really a very contemporary idea. It's changed a lot. My grandmother was a piano teacher, and my grandfather was a high school teacher, and they went to their jobs during the day, and then they came home from their jobs, and they were done with their jobs. And that is not the way that we think about work today, almost entirely. And it's just like, it's interesting to ask, well, why not? And can it be? And would we be happier if it were?
And I do think, part of the shift is technology. We're all so connected with our phones, with our laptops, this sort of always on culture. Part of it is the type of work we do. When you write or you create or you do something with your brain, it's, it's easier for people to expect that you're always going to be doing that than when you need to be in a specific building or, especially something like a factory specifically working during set hours. So it is really fascinating how many elements of work are changing at the same time. And I think it can be really hard to pin down any one because it's like a Gordian knot with 17 different levers.
Mm-hmm. I think that's right. But one trend that I really like is that I am seeing people set better limits with their technology. And I actually think it's making them more productive. And I'll give you an example of that. We use a chat software in the office. I think a lot of knowledge workers do. And people will put by their names when they're available and when they're not. So, if it's before 9 a.m., I'm not going to drop a message to my colleague Gaia because she's on the West Coast, and by her chat message, there's a little snooze button. And I remember she's sleeping. And just beginning to set those cultural boundaries, I think, is a really healthy thing that lets us do our work better.
Yeah, I love that. And then I think companies need to establish norms like, does the snooze mean that you can send a message if it's top of mind, but you shouldn't expect a response for a while? Or does it mean like, hey, please don't clutter up my chat. Just wait till I'm back. I think it's also so interesting, the intersection of all of these different tools. And then what are the human rules of conduct that we decide we'd like to put in place in terms of how we use them?
Yes, exactly.
Well, I know we're getting close to the end. So I think I just have one more question, which is, you've just launched your second season of Hello Monday. And, do you have either any lessons from the first season, things that your listeners really resonated with that you're taking forward into this new season, or any hints or previews of what we can expect?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked about that because the second season is so far so fun. We opened with Faris, the actor, and Anna had me to her house, and that was just a real blast. Normally we record our podcasts in the studio, but for this one, I went out to LA, we sat down over a glass of wine, and we talked about what it means to be a brand and how when you are a brand, and whether that is a Hollywood celebrity like Anna or whether you are a social influencer with 150 followers and you're catering to them, it can be really challenging to then how to figure out how to be an authentic self. And that's a tension that probably our grandparents didn't need to negotiate in our workforce, but we really do, no matter who we are. So that is really a great episode. And then, and I don't know if you know this guy, you may, but I had Jerry Colonna on. And Jerry
my gosh. Yes, I'm obsessed with. No, although if you know a way to make that happen, I'm raising my hand enthusiastically over here. No, I'm most of the way through his book. Just a huge fan of his philosophy. So anyway, that's funny.
His philosophy is radical, and yet it's so simple. And it is just that basically until we make the unconscious conscious, we are relegated to a place where we are destined to repeat it over and over and over again. It's like straight up, maybe you're struggling in your work because you need to look at a thing that happened in your childhood. And that, it turns out, is very hard to do. So stay tuned.
Very hard to do. Well, I'm very excited. And thank you so much for chatting with me today. I would encourage for all of you listening, please go check out Hello Monday. You can hear a lot more of Jesse, as well as a variety of again, you have such a great selection of guests. So definitely I would encourage anyone listening to download episodes, subscribe, listen, and thank you so much for being on the show and for sharing a little bit of some of your perspectives and lessons on the world of work. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for having me, Katherine. I'll talk to you soon, I hope.
Take care. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
The Muse is the best place to research companies and careers. More than 75 million people each year trust the Muse to help them win at work, from finding a job to building the skills to help them grow and advance. Organizations use our platform to attract and hire talent by providing an authentic look at company culture, workplace, and values through the stories of their employees.
You've been listening to The New Rules of Work. To learn more about this episode and to research companies and jobs, visit themuse.com. To ensure you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast player. If you have any questions for The Muse or for host Katherine Minshew, feel free to reach out to press@themuse.com. Thank you for listening. Until next time.